Right, you're nearly at the end. Don't worry, you'll be fine. I gave a talk the other week, and which Anita had arranged as well, and I had a similar kind of slot, and I just had the feeling that at the kind of end of the day, people were a bit dead. So, are you all feeling a bit dead? You sure? There's some signs of life out there. That's brilliant. Okay. So, there's a tremendous amount that has gone on, and the end of life strategy and the stuff that's come out of it has been a huge success, which is great. But having said that, we have to be realistic about the problems that we face. So, if we're realistic about our problems, we stand a chance of dealing with them. If we look at where our current problems are, we know that things like identification of patients in the last year of life is still immensely difficult. Clinical engagement for, not in the palliative care world, but generally, in the general end-of-life world, is still difficult. Lack of time for training, particularly with nursing staff. Lack of clear pathways, in particular links between primary and secondary care, lack of outcome measures, and poor methods of communicating with the community. And in particular, with respect to clinical engagement, many clinicians and doctors and nurses worry about having difficult conversations, and in particular with things about loss of hope and causing upset, and worries that you might. This Find Your 1% campaign is a great idea. But you know what healthcare professionals are like, so you need to find all the people who are going to die in the next year. Well, what happens if they die in 13 months? And it's a terrible concern for people. Of course, it doesn't matter. And the main thing that we really need to do is to start linking together all the work that we've done. So what's in our favour? We've already had a lot of significant improvement. End-of-life strategy, end-of-life programme has had a tremendous impact in a whole variety of different ways. We've had in our locality, we've had two really significant initiatives which has made a really big difference. The first one is the planning head documentation, which is documentation around advanced care planning, which by and large has been adapted broadly across the whole of the southwest, and it's a document that's very easy to give to patients and leave them to get on with it. And then we've also got the end-of-life register, and we've now got, EPACs. It's always going to struggle with that one. We now got thousands of people across the southwest who are on different EPACs. And the other thing that we've got going for us is the acute trust, the Routes to Success Guide, improving end-of-life care in acute trusts, and we're in Western, we're one of 3 hospitals in the southwest who are involved in the national pilot, and that also is tremendously helpful. Okay, so what's gone on already? Just to give you some idea, I'm sure you can't read all of that, but this is the trends around what's been happening with end-of-life care in the southwest over the last 4 years, and what you can see is, if I can point it out, have we got? There is a laser. Yeah, good. This one is deaths in acute trusts, and what we're seeing is that the percentage death in acute trusts is going down, and that's before that it was rising. What we're seeing also is that that's this year. That's 2010-11. We're seeing increasing number of people die in their own place of residence. We're seeing increasing percentage of people dying in nursing homes and residential homes. And I think what we can say about that is at least these institutions are becoming increasingly able to hang on to their people rather than sending them on into hospital to die. And hospices remain more or less stable. So lots of good stuff, lots going in the right direction. Rate is slow, but it's possible that in this year, it looks like the rate at which things are happening is picking up, which would be really good. The acute end-of-life care acute hospitals how-to guide, based around 5 tools that it's always good to have something meaty that people can get their teeth into. And the 5 tools are advanced care planning, the EPACs, Amber Care Bundle, Liverpool Care Pathway, and Rapid Discharge Home to Die. And 2 other components which are incredibly helpful, which are outcome measures and key performance indicators, and the National End-of-Life Care Intelligence Network. And I'll talk about those things as I go on. I think that the last 2 in particular are really important, because end-of-life care has got to be more than a good idea. It's actually, it sounds like a great idea, and the end-of-life strategy is built on a good idea with moderate amount of evidence to say that the approach works. It's easy to deliver education and everyone smiles. You train people in advanced care planning. If you don't measure, it's no more than a good idea. So measurement is absolutely key. And the more precise you can get with measurement, the more you can clearly define where you need to put your effort. So we've got a programme going on in our hospital with a view to improving end-of-life care. What we really are keen to do is to build end-of-life care into the routine culture of the ward. And we managed to get some money to support nurses to spend 1 day a week working on the wards, doing nothing but end-of-life care. For those of you who've got clinical backgrounds, you'll know that if you try and, you have palliative care linked nurses, and the thing that happens with the linked nurses is that as soon as they get back on the ward, they just get absorbed into ward duty. And that a lot of the learning that they have just doesn't get disseminated. So we thought it'd be a good idea if we could buy some time that would allow nurses just to devote their time to end-of-life care, so that they could look to make sure that it becomes a routine part of ward culture and is therefore sustainable. This is just part of normal life of what you do. The Amber Bundle is I'm sure, are you all familiar with the Amber Bundle? Okay, the Amber Care Bundle is essentially a treatment escalation plan. So you've got somebody who comes into hospital, they might die, they've got limited reversibility, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So what you do is you say, okay, what we need to do is we need to acknowledge the fact that we're unsure about the outcome. We need to set a treatment ceiling. So should this person go to high care? Should they go to intensive care? Should they be resuscitated? Answer all those questions. We need to communicate that to our nursing and medical colleagues, and we need to talk to the patient and their families about it. And there's a time window for doing it. So it's a way of making sure, a simple way of making sure you have good medical decision making. And what the Amber team have come up with is the fact that the outcome of these patients is very poor. For those people who leave hospital, who've been placed on the Amber Bundle, then something like 30% are dead within 3 months or something like that. Is that figure accurate, Anita? You might know more than me. So it's a way of identifying people early on in the patient journey as they come into hospital. So, and our acute unit are very keen to see this happen. So that's very good. What we're really keen to do is to make sure that we build in the links with the community. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a sidestep here. There is a big problem which is largely unrecognised, and that is, how do we communicate between primary and secondary care? Anyone got any idea how many letters a GP practice will get in a day? Go on.
I think we audited ours and we got something like, it was 900 letters a week in total.
You're doing quite well.
And that's a sort of medium-sized practice.
You're doing quite well, because some practices are getting 300 or 400 letters a day. And if you think about it, it is an impossible task to get the information out of the letter into the GP clinical system and get an action based on it. So, and that's borne out by the experience, I think, of many hospital clinicians. And in fact, the palliative care clinicians in Bristol did a great little project where they identified patients who were in the last year of life and sent a letter to the GP asking the GP to place the patients on do the advanced care planning and get the patients on the EPACs. They sent 18 letters out. How many do you think ended up going on the EPACs? Let's have a guess. 3. That's somebody new already. Cheat. Okay, so you know, then when you go and talk to GPs about the reality of doing advanced care planning, how that fits into their daily working practice, you talk to district nurses, you talk to community matrons about it, actually it's very problematic. And what's really important is that if we're going to start identifying significant numbers of people in hospital, we must be absolutely sure that we build the links into the community that will allow advanced care planning to take place and allow these people to have a think about what their futures will be. And just also to talk very briefly about advanced care planning, I spoke with a community matron last week and she described it perfectly, really. She was saying, you know, the thing about advanced care planning is you've got to know the patient, and then what you do is you take the document and you start the process and you leave it with the patient and you come back next week and have you managed to look at any of it? How did you get on? And then you come back and it's a process that takes place over a number of weeks and you just do little steps at a time, you know, and that you deal with the family members. It's quite a skilled process. It's not something that can just be done willy-nilly. So it's really important that we appreciate the reality of how we get people to do advanced care planning. Okay, so we've got a programme in the Trust. What we've done is we linked with the End of Life programme. They very kindly supported us in giving us some money to allow nurses to be nurse educators. We also linked with something that's got a funny name like Quelqua or something like that, which is St Christopher's programme, where they worked out what you needed to do to educate ward nurses, and that means taking a nurse on the ward for 5 days and training her at the hospice. We've completed that step of it, and the nurses are now highly motivated and very enthusiastic. And you know, it's nice to hear nurses at the end of it saying, do you know, I remember why I came into nursing. So they're really keen to be getting on with it, and we've set a load of aims and objectives which they have some input into, and I've just dragged out some of the aims and objectives of what we're looking at doing. But you know, amongst there, I mean, there are obvious ones, you know, communication and just-in-case medications, DNA form, that kind of thing. Mental Capacity Act and Advanced Care Planning, there are obvious ones, and there are the not so obvious ones, and in particular, you know, attending the ward rounds and asking the doctors to say, do you think this person, would you be surprised if, you know, that question. It's interesting, we did a baseline audit on one of the wards, acute medical ward. It's a respiratory ward. There are 27 patients on the day. The registrar on the ward identified 21 as being in the last year of life. And so we're looking at how many of those patients actually have something mentioned in their discharge summary about that. We're looking at quite large numbers of people. And we know that where we need to focus our efforts is largely in the non-cancer setting. You know, we do quite well with cancer, but we don't do so well, as you'll see, with the non-cancer. And in particular, we're going to, you know, as well as getting the nurses to go on the ward round, to start reminding the ward staff, and is that they're going to be able to do data collection. And generally, I'm quite enthusiastic about IT things. I'm really impressed that you've got iPads knocking around here, networking, and what a brilliant idea. We didn't have a good experience with the National Programme for IT and the electronic record that's gone into the hospital for a whole variety of different reasons. But I managed to persuade the hospital IT department to write a template for an end-of-life page, which will mostly be either drop-down or button answers, which means that the nurses can collect the information on the individual patient record, and that we'll be able to do an analysis by just getting reporting on those data items, which is going to make a huge difference. So, linking to the community, who does advanced care planning in the community? So who does advanced care planning in the community? Do the GPs do it? Sometimes. Okay, so in the practice you were at, you had just under 100 people die in the last year, and about 90% of those were predictable deaths. How many of those, about 90 people, how many of those do you think will have had advanced care planning? Two. And so could you see a way that the GPs would do all of those advanced care plannings? Okay. Is that a surprise to people sat around the table? It's a very radical statement, because we've been focusing an awful lot on GPs doing advanced care planning. Is it reality? Maybe in the minority of cases, but not in the majority. Can you see your district nurses and community matrons doing it? Yes. Do you think they got time to do all of that? No. Well, it's really difficult, isn't it? This is not an easy solution. And what we're looking at is significant numbers of people leaving hospital being identified as being in the last year of life, and we're going to have to work out how these people are going to access advanced care planning. It's tricky stuff. And not only are we going to need to work out who's going to do it, we're going to need to make sure that the information from the hospital actually gets to those people so that the advanced care planning can take place. We talked about the problem with GP letters. So how are we going to make sure that information gets handed on? There's an awful lot of it. Here's again another slight sidetrack. We wanted to be able to enter patient demographics onto the register, onto the EPACs without patient consent, because this actually is an efficient communication tool. Because essentially, if you can enter the demographics, then when the GPs do their palliative care, QOF points, GSF, whatever you want to call it, end of life meeting, then the patient's name would come up. Seems ideal. No other information. We built the register so that unless there was consent obtained, the only thing you could put there on the demographics, we thought, yeah, I can see it might be a bit awkward. So we went to the National Information Governance Board to ask them whether it was okay. And they said, no, it isn't. You can't do that. And actually now that leaves us with a real problem about how we communicate the information from primary into secondary care. You know, I'm not sure there's how much realism there is in the system, but we'll see. Okay. So what we're going to do is we've got 10 nurses who are going to spend 1 day a week for a period of 9 months working on the ward. They are not going to work in nurses' uniforms, and they're going to work out all the details of how you make end-of-life care work on the wards. It's a great project, really excited about it. And that absolutely key is measurement. I can't stress this enough, because it has to be much more than a good idea. We have to know that what we're doing is having an impact. And we have to know, in particular, where our weak areas are. And actually, so if you take something like reporting on the register, you know, on the EPACs, one of the things that can be done is that you can give a report which shows how many people each GP surgery has entered onto the register, and so you'll have comparative data. Now, there's a lot of concern from PCTs and various people about, oh my God, you can't do that, you can't do that. But actually, I believe, as clinicians, we want that information. We want to see how we're doing. We want to know where our weaknesses are. We want to know what we need to do to improve. And I think that the flow of information and who it's controlled by is a difficult issue. But we just have to grow up about this. And if there are things which show that we have weak practices, we have to know. It's really important, and we have to know down to specific detail. And I'm going to say, I just have a natural inclination to be controversial. I can't resist it. So there's always something in the talk that's going to come up. I'm bound to say something controversial. And so there's a health warning about what I'm going to say next. What we've seen in the NHS is we have seen a huge amount of management activity, which has not always benefited either patients or healthcare workers. And behind this management activity has been a whole variety of management techniques to persuade people to do things in a whole variety of different ways. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on management in particular, and I hope there's a significant number of commissioners in the room because I think this information is really important. But I have a suspicion that these management techniques are about persuading people to do things that they don't want to do. And I think that what we have with the end-of-life strategy is that we have to appeal to people to do the things because it's the right thing to do. And I believe that healthcare professionals really want to behave like this. And in particular, the big strength that we have with end-of-life care is it applies to all of us. You may not get a disease, but for sure you're going to die. And none of us want to die in horrible circumstances. And actually, if you think about it, most of us would like to, not everyone, by any stretch of the imagination, but many people would like to die in the comfort of their home with a loving family around them and dying peacefully. And that is our starting point, essentially, and it's applicable to everyone, and I don't believe we should ever forget it. Because if we are going to win this argument, we have to make it personally applicable. And we have to remember, what would this be like for me? What would it be like for my mother or father? And that way we can get some sense into the system. Otherwise, I think that having a management technique that persuades people to do things is the wrong way of starting. So that was it. That was the most controversial thing, and I'm not going to apologise for it. And the other thing is that what's really important is, that what we've seen within the NHS and social care is silo thinking. That organisations have perverse incentives for behaving in particular ways. And while it might resolve a short-term problem within that organisation, it does not solve the long-term problem. It makes it worse. And I honestly believe that every person in this room has got examples of that. And I've certainly got loads of examples of that. And what we have to do, and in particular with end-of-life care, is to have joined-up thinking and think about patients and pathways, not about organisations. And I think that the current focus on acute hospitals is a way of us doing that. That we're building on a lot of work that's already taken place on, and the end-of-life strategy is a complex intervention across health and social care community. So if we're going to talk specifically about reports, what reports are we talking about? Well, who died where? What was their diagnosis? How many people died with and without advanced care planning? If they didn't die in their place of choice, why not? And not to say that they died in the wrong place, which is not really the issue. You just want to be sure that, for example, that the reason that they died somewhere else was not because there was insufficient services in the community, but because some event happened or somebody changed their mind or whatever. It's not right or wrong. It's just working out where the weaknesses are so you can do something about it. And then how many people who died in hospital were an expected death were placed on the Liverpool Care Pathway. So I did a number of years ago an audit of, I looked through the notes of every patient who died in our hospital within a year, went through 600 notes. It was a good experience for the most part. I wish I'd had a photo of it because my team built a wall in my office of notes stacked up around me with only a little doorway to go through. I can tell you that 20% of the deaths were sudden, 80% of the deaths were expected, and nearly all of those deaths were recognised as being expected. But what we saw is the use of the Liverpool Care Pathway for people who were in for more than a week was around about the 45-50% mark. So that there's a lot of people who are dying who are expected deaths who are not using the pathway. And the pathway itself is not the issue. The piece of documentation is not the issue. It's what it means. It's the support and training that goes behind it that provides high quality care. And so one of the pathway itself is a tool for providing high quality care, for delivering education. So we need to ask a difficult question about how many people actually died on the pathway and how many of those were expected deaths. National End of Life Intelligence Network, this has been, they have been incredibly helpful in the data that they produce. In particular, what it allows us to do is that we can link data sets. Now, for the Southwest, it's much easier because the intelligence network is held by the Southwest Public Health Observatory, who, as you know, runs the Southwest Cancer Network register thing that Tarek knows all about. And it means that they already have access to a significant amount of data, and that they have access to the mortality files from ONS data and hospital episode statistics. And you can start linking data sources that allows you to drill down to specific detail. You can have a general overview as well as drilling down into specific detail about, if you want, you can follow an individual patient's journey. You can get down to that level of detail and even find the costing for it. And it means that we can look at trends, and means we can look at individual cases where things go wrong and chase those up. I've got some, just the next slide, so you'll see very clear detail here about all of that. It's all right, I'm not expecting you to read it, I thought I'd point it out. So, this is the, oh God, cancer deaths for North Somerset. Now this data is available online, so it's available to everyone. You can just do it from your home computer. And when we look at cancer deaths, what we see for North Somerset is we're here. We're doing pretty well for cancer deaths. We've got hospital death rates of around about 30%. And that's some of that is in Bristol end of the patch, and some of it is in the Western end, and I suspect we might be slightly lower in the Western end. What you can see here, the orange dots, hopefully you can see those, is that means we're below national average, and the blue dots are national averages. So what we're seeing is that for us, for different age groups, we're doing pretty well. For different diseases, it looks all right, doesn't it? It's not so bad. Cardiovascular respiratory disease. The reality is that those figures are showing hospital death rates for cardiovascular disease of 65%, and for respiratory disease for 67%. And we're doing quite well. It's not so hot, is it? It's amazing when you think about it. But that information is so helpful because it shows us very clearly where we need to focus our efforts. And that means that in terms of acute trust, we have to get the clinicians engaged in thinking about this process. This is interesting. Here, those orange dots are nursing home deaths. And what we see in North Somerset is that we have a high number of nursing homes, and those nursing homes are pretty good at keeping people in them and stopping them coming into hospital to die. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they do an important role. And what we also see here is that the home death rate is a bit lower, and that's than national averages. And what we're probably seeing are these two working together. And that's curious for us because we need to, one of the things that we need to be sure that we're doing is that we need to be asking the question, do these people have a conversation about where they want to die? Because these figures only really start to make sense if we can say, well, actually, everyone has chosen to die and managed to achieve that place of choice. But I suspect, well, I know that we're a long way short of that, and that's a major bit of work that we've got to do. These are the profiles of around place of death for all ages. And it allows us, these are not disease specific, but they are age specific. You know, again, we do pretty well, but when what you can do with the End-of-Life Intelligence Network is that you can just click on your area. Just click on, and it's done by local authority. And of course, that information is present for all of those local authorities. Hands up who's used this. Okay, a few people. Hands up who think they might start looking at it. Come on, Rob, put your hand up, goodness sake. Okay, so there's a lot of incredibly useful information here. You know, that if for commissioners who are sat in the room, this is really, really important information. And you know, what I would say with respect to acute hospitals is that what tends to happen around commissioning around acute hospitals is that they tend to get left out of it. It becomes just, oh, this is an internal problem for the hospital. There is a slight move away from that with sequins now, in that it is possible to set sequins which are specific. I would say that we are not ready to have sequins which set targets for reductions unless the targets are realistic. And we need to look at trends of what's happened already to know whether targets are realistic. I think what's more important is about setting sequence targets which show that good process is in place. And Torbay, they came up with a very good sequence which tracked the movement. Oh, I mean, Maggie, you can come and tell us about it. It tracked movement from patients from hospital into the community to make sure that all the steps were in place and were being done. That's actually a very, very sensible approach. So if you are a commissioner sat here thinking about end-of-life care, please think about commissioning in acute trusts and think about commissioning pathways. Okay. So, in summary, we have to build on the existing good work. We need to ensure that hospital teams all participate in end-of-life care. We need absolutely to count, because in particular doctors love to see data. They'll say, I'm doing that already, unless you can say, no, you're not. And in particular, we have to make sure that we're linking with the work that goes on in acute trusts out into the community, having very specific, clear pathways where we can trace patient flows and see where the gaps are. So I'll finish with two stories. The first one is somebody who came into hospital had everything done. They were on the registers, on the EPACs, they got their advanced care planning stuff and all that sort of thing. They still came into hospital. But because everything was done, we could trace back as to why that person came into hospital. And it allowed one of the PCT GPs to go back to the original practice where the patient came from and find out the reason why. And as it turned out, it was a locum GP who wasn't aware of documentation and the pathways. And being able to track down to that individual level is really important. And the other thing is, just in case people get the idea that everyone's got to die at home, actually it's not about that. This is not about everyone dying at home. This is about making sure that people have high quality end of life care wherever they die. And we had one patient in particular who was known to, one of our community nurses was called, community matron was struggling to do advanced care planning and called the hospice. The nurse went out there. As it happens, she knew the lady because she'd been the main carer of somebody who died in the hospice previously. She had severe lung disease, severe lung fibrosis. She wanted to die at home, but she realised she couldn't because she had a living carer who was quite young and knew it wasn't realistic, and she knew she needed to go into hospital. She wanted to be able to get her will done, and you know, one of the things about advanced care planning is this is not all about where do you want to die. Have you got your affairs in order? Have you sorted out your will? Have you thought about your funeral arrangements? It includes that kind of thing as well, and that patients do not come to conversations about advanced care planning in a linear way. They come at it in all sorts of different directions. So she was really keen to get her will done. So she got her will done the following day and was admitted to the hospital that evening with their advanced care planning document in her hand. Because of that, she was admitted directly to the ward and put in a bed and made comfortable. And the next morning, they found her dead. And what she'd done is she'd taken her mask off and just placed it by her bed. And they knew that she didn't want resuscitation so that she could die peacefully in her place of choice. And I think that that's a really important message to take home. This is not about people dying in their home. It is about making sure the quality of the care wherever they die is good. Okay. Thank you.